Welcome, everyone, to the Change Starts Here podcast. I'm your host, Dustin Odham. And on today's podcast, we have a really cool guest who is the first blind person to ever summit Mount Everest. For him, he hasn't stopped there. I feel like that was the only beginning of it. He's since climbed all 7 summits, so the highest point on every continent. He's been on the cover of Time magazine. He's recently kayaked, one of my dream trips. He's kayaked the Grand Canyon and all the crazy white water there. I'm terrified, and I can only imagine how it was for him. He's a former teacher, and he's a nonprofit executive that's focused on the no barriers mindset, which I'll let him explain it, but it's all about how to take what's within you and believe what's within you is stronger than what's in your way. Erik's an inspiration. I'm incredibly excited to have him on here. Erik Weihenmayer is just an awesome conversation. Thank you for being here. If you haven't subscribed before, please subscribe. We need your continued support, and we appreciate you being here. Enjoy this conversation. Thank you for being here. We start the podcast with the same question every time. So who are you, and what do you love about what you do?
Mm-hmm. Well, my name is Erik Weihenmayer. I am an adventurer, an author, filmmaker, and I run an organization called No Barriers. We help people break through barriers in their lives and really tap into the human spirit and figure out ways of reclaiming their lives and elevating the world in some way. So that's been really fulfilling. What I love about what I do is, obviously the physical sensation of being able to go into these remote places as a blind person and experience the world through my other senses, through my sense of touch, my sense of hearing, my sense of smell, and then be able to experience these incredible, beautiful things in nature through my other senses. That's been really powerful for me. Like going to the top of a mountain and being able to use what blind people call echolocation, which is listening for sound vibrations moving through space, bouncing off of objects, giving you information. But like on the summit of a mountain, those sound vibrations just move infinitely through space. And it's a really beautiful sound. So yeah, experiencing adventure and exploration, but not with my eyes.
So for our listeners, there's lots of places they can go to learn about your story. So I don't want to go too much there, but a little piece that I do think's not as widely known as I assume people would know is that you weren't born blind. You kind of became that over time. And on one interview I was listening to of yours, you talked about when you went blind, you were kind of a prisoner in your own mind. Can you describe what that's like and what helped you kind of break free of that?
Yeah, when I went blind, it was about a week before my freshman year in high school. Now, I couldn't see that well when I was born, but I could see well enough to ride a bike, and I even dabbled riding motorcycles and things like that, but I probably had no business doing that. And running through the woods, I was always a kid running 10 paces behind everyone else, falling into ditches and bouncing off of trees. But I could see well enough to function barely. And then, I went blind fully. And I remember sitting in the cafeteria listening to all the excitement passing me by. And it wasn't about going blind. I was too much of a pragmatist to worry about that. Sure, going blind was scary, not seeing, but really it was for me all the things I was going to miss out on. And yes, 100% I felt like I was in a prison. And I created partly that prison in my own mind. Yes. The world put me there, blindness put me there, but partly I was putting myself there because I didn't want to be blind. So I just fought it tooth and nail. I didn't want to be seen as a blind person. I was like a raccoon just snarling at the world. And it took a long time to kind of fight my way out of that survival mode and realize hey, there's ways out of this prison, but I got to be intentional about it, or else I'm going to sit in this prison for the rest of my life, listening to life go by. And a life that was lived for nothing. And that honestly was terrifying.
Yeah, I feel like, one of the things that's really inspiring to hear you say is that, when people have interviewed you, people will say, man, you're blind and it's a prison. You're like, I don't, yeah, that may have been my prison, but everyone seems to have their own prisons, their own challenges that are just as real to them. Um, what what are the prisons? I know you help people break out of these prisons, part of your no barriers work, but
Yeah.
what are the prisons that you see people in?
Yeah.
And what are the steps you encourage people to take to help break free from those prisons?
Mm. Well, you know, maybe I'm laying it out on a limb here, but I think that people start out being motivated, right? I don't think people start out being lazy or unmotivated. I think we all start out, let's say 99% of us start out with excitement and joy and possibilities and excitement and adventure. And then what happens is all these barriers get in the way, and they just keep knocking you flat on your back, or some catastrophic event changes the course of your life and just throws you into that prison. Or maybe you step out of the comfort zone, as everyone says, that's like the phrase of the modern world: step out of your comfort zone. And they try something and they get shattered, they get beat down, and they go, why would I ever try something like that again? I'm going to stay right here in this nice, safe place, on this nice, safe plateau. To go any higher is just too risky and scary. Or maybe the world changes, like in COVID, and we just don't feel equipped to attack it anymore. Or you're plodding up the mountain, slowly but surely, and you're doing what everyone's told you to do, and one barrier after the next, they get in your way, and you get shoved to the sidelines, and now you're stagnating, and you're in this maybe darker place, a place where you don't want to be. And so, yeah, I think those are the kind of prisons. Sometimes the prison is cynicism. As we get older, just pours down around our brain like a prison bars, and so, yeah, I think there are so many things that stop us. And my second book, The Adversity Advantage, I teamed up with this cool scientist, Dr. Paul Stoltz, and he had studied resiliency and adversity, helping people to change their relationship with adversity, to make it more positive. And we categorize people into three categories. We call them quitters, campers, or climbers. Obviously, me being a climber, and so it fit. But we're all striving to climb. Not just necessarily climbing mountains, but trying to figure out how to climb, how to challenge ourselves, how to explore, how to keep evolving and growing. And it's something I ask myself every day, like, how do I climb? It's so much simpler. It's so much easier to camp out. But I think most of us want to live life in the current.
Yeah, I mean, you help folks. Some of the main tenets I've seen of yours are, helping people develop a guiding vision. What role do you think that has in breaking free of a prison, and what do I need to do to start developing that?
Well, that's an exciting and a long, complicated journey, because I think, I'll speak for myself, when I say this. I think a lot of times we're living life on the surface, right? Like I became a pretty good kayaker and kayaked the Grand Canyon. And that was pretty wild. And one of the things I learned as a kayaker was that you are on the surface of the water, and you're getting knocked all around on the surface of the water by giant waves and boils and whirlpools. But a lot of that energy is created from the very deep down depths of the river, could be 30, 40, 50 feet down. And so you kind of are under this illusion that you're experiencing the fullness of awareness, but you're really just experiencing a sliver on the surface. And so I think vision is diving down into the depths of your psyche, and trying to understand yourself, and trying to say, who am I? And who do I want to be? And what's that light that energizes me? You could call it a soul, you could call it the human spirit, you could call it a light. What is that thing that's deeper than biology, that's deeper than hormones shooting through my brain, and fear and doubt and all that stuff that gets in the way? What's that, the essence of who I wish to be? And I think so that from that springs kind of a value system that is your guiding vision. It's your values and action, and it's it enables you to not be able to see the outcome, but to have a internal guiding system, like a headlamp in a storm, where you sort of have a faith that, like, I'm going to get through this and I'm going to emerge on the other side stronger in some way.
Did you always have this worldview, or is this something that uh, you find it in high school? I was interviewing a gentleman recently named Jeffrey Canada, who's a really influential person in the world of education, and he said he felt this call in his life, as early as being a teenager. How early did you feel like you had a vision to change lives and
Yeah.
to inspire others?
Well, all this stuff that we're talking about, like it's a very slow, painful process as you get older, learning how to put the language around your feelings and create the template for your beliefs, so that takes a long time. But I think I felt it, yes, as a teenager. I was going blind. I could barely see, barely out of one eye, and one of the few things I could still do was to watch television. And I'd press my face right up against the screen, and I was watching a show. Actually, it was called That's Incredible. It was back in the 80s, and they were focusing on this guy named Terry Fox. And a lot of people know Terry, but he passed away. But he lost a leg to cancer, and he was in the hospital, and he decided he was going to run across Canada, and that was like a marathon a day. He actually called it the Marathon of Hope, and he raised a ton of money for cancer research, running across Canada after losing a leg to cancer. And I remember looking at his face, and it was just this absolute contradiction, exhaustion and exaltation all mixed together. And you could see, it was one of the last images I saw before I went blind, that this person with this fragile outer shell, but this light kind of burning in his eyes and burning outside of, transcending that fragile shell. And I thought to myself, when bad things happen to you, you don't have to do the things that you're programmed to do. We can get bigger. Those adversities, those challenges can lead us to places that make our lives better in some way.
You start going blind, because you go into high school, and then you get the courage somewhere to become a wrestler, which is pretty amazing. I've got my sight fully. There's no chance that I would be a wrestler for lots of reasons. You go to college and decide to be a teacher. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was a teacher for 6 years.
What led you into teaching, and how was that experience with being blind?
Well, one of the things I learned pretty quickly about being blind is you have to really improvise. You have to be adaptive. You really have to think your way through, and you have to create a lot of systems and strategies and tools and technologies. And it's everyone thinks about this, but as a blind person, you just can't survive. Like, I was late for this interview because I couldn't find my earphones. They'd fallen out of my bag on the floor, so I can't glance around with my eyes to find those earphones. So I got to put them away in the right spot every time. You know what I mean? So being blind is, you have to have systems. So that's really how I flourished as a teacher. I'd have systems in the classroom. I'd have Braille charts, so I knew where the kids were in the room. I'd have the kids write on the board. I had technology that helped me correct tests and read essays. And I had assistants that would come in from the high school, and they'd get credits for helping me around the classroom to correct papers and things like that. So I had this whole array of systems that enabled me to get the job done. In my class, you didn't have to raise your hand. You could actually, because I wasn't going to call on you anyway, so you could actually talk out. It was one of the few classes they had where they got to talk without raising that hand.
How old were the kids you taught?
I taught middle school. I taught 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th.
And you did not have a hand raising system?
It was amazing. And it was a little imperfect sometimes, but I thought it was cool because it taught the kids in an adult situation, like if you're sitting around a board meeting or some kind of seminar, nobody's raising their hand, you're just talking. So it was a pretty sophisticated way of embracing community.
When you were thinking about being a teacher, when you're telling people you want to be a teacher, studying to be a teacher, were there folks in your life who said that you just can't do that, given what they thought you had as limitations?
My dad and my parents were always really insanely supportive, always. I mean, I say that, and it's, not all people are born with parents that are just insanely supportive of everything you do. My parents would launch me out into the world, and yeah, I'd get beat up a little bit and they'd sweep me back up and rebuild me a bit and sweep me out again. And so I had great parents, and they never doubted me. But sure, you get out into the world and people doubt you because they don't know who you are, and they are judging you just on the basis of one thing. I remember I was trying to get a job as a dishwasher one summer. I thought, okay, lowest common denominator. I'm sure I could do dishes. I do them at home, right? And I went around to all these restaurants, and one restaurant, they said, Eric, our restaurant, we'd love to hire you. That was the way they always started. We'd love to hire you, but our restaurant's too big. We think you'd get lost in the restaurant. You'd get disoriented, pick a smaller restaurant. So I did. I picked a small one. They said, hey, we'd love to hire you, but our kitchen's too small. You'll bump into things. You could cut yourself. There's knives and stuff all around. And so I was like, oh my gosh. So I picked a medium-sized restaurant, and they're like, we'd love to hire you, but our pots come in really hot and you burn yourself, and we think you'd be a liability. So everyone had a reason. And I never got a job that summer. It was really such a hard slap in the face to realize that no matter how good you are, there are these ceilings above you, and you cannot break through them because it's people's perceptions of who you are that you can't fight. So yeah, for me, being a teacher, I applied. I got a lot of interviews. A lot of them said, hey, I love to think about you as a teacher, but our board would never be able to pass this, or, our parent community would never accept this. I'm so sorry. But yeah, no, there was one school in Arizona that said, hey, this is really cool. I think you could be a great teacher, but you could also maybe teach the kids a little something extra. So I got my chance.
That's awesome. And so then when did you get the harebrained idea to, I don't know, summit Everest? A lot of people want to hike when you're thinking, yeah, why not just hike the tallest mountain?
Well, it's not like I'm in the movies where, you climb your first mountain and you say, I'm going to climb Everest someday.
Right.
There were whiffs of it, like I was learning Braille in high school, how to read with my fingers. And my Braille teacher was really smart. She would Braille out articles about people skiing across Antarctica and climb Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay climbing Everest. But then at 16, I got this letter, and it was in Braille as well. And it was a group taking blind kids rock climbing as part of a rehabilitation center for the blind. It's called the Carroll Center for the Blind. And they had this rec program for blind kids because we missed out on ball sports. So they'd take us horseback riding and sailing and canoeing and tandem biking. And one weekend they took us rock climbing. And that was the definition of adventure. I was worried as a blind person I wouldn't have adventure in my life. Like, as I said, I'd just be sitting inside this prison, partly created by myself. But rock climbing was this beautiful expression where I could feel my way up the rock face and find little divots and cracks and pockets and connect the dots in my mind, map out the face and bring my body from A to B to C. I loved it. It was so full of adventure. And I guess that really did create the trajectory of my life, because 16 years later, I climbed Everest. But it was really more like, okay, I'm going to climb a bigger rock face. Oh, I'm going to try ice climbing. Oh, I'm going to get into the snow and learn how to ski. It was a very step-by-step process. And it wasn't probably till I was like 28 years old that I started thinking, could I climb Everest? Is this a real possibility? Obviously people came out of the woodwork and said, you're going to die if you try it. You're going to kill everyone on the mountain. You're going to draw everyone into a rescue. But the people that I climbed with and knew me, they were like, hey, you got a shot, just like probably more than other people, because you put so much time and effort and energy and training into this whole process, both, physically, mentally, building all those systems and strategies like I was talking about to be able to flourish in the outdoors. So the people that knew me said I could do it. And then it was just the process of being brave enough to start talking about it out loud.
Yeah, those of us who, I've worked with Franklin Covey for almost a decade now. And so I've known of your story because we're honored to have a relationship with you and telling your story as well internally. And I know you've talked a lot about the importance of choosing the right team.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how we do that? I mean, right now we're going into the start of another school year, and I'd be curious to know things that I should be looking for to make sure that we have the right team and that we are gelling in a way that's going to allow us to summon our own Everest.
Well, I think, I mean, teams are all shapes and sizes, and one, teams don't just happen. I think that's kind of like a little bit of a myth, like, teams just magically happen. I mean, maybe they do if you get super lucky, but I think teams are carefully built, methodically, carefully built, strategically built. Sometimes they're built in the flames of adversity, right? If you're a committed team going through some challenge together, really, believe it or not, can unite you and help you to lean in and support and believe in each other. So adversity can be a good thing maybe for a team. It was for my early days on my teams. We went to a peak called Amada Blam a year before Everest, and we were good, strong individuals, but we had never really climbed anything. We had a disaster. You'd call it a disaster. One of my friends fell coming down in a storm, 150 feet. He landed on a ledge that barely saved his life, and he went into shock, pulmonary edema. His lungs started filling with fluid, and we had to get him down the mountain. The whole mountain was just, the wind was picking you up and slamming you back against the face. We're carrying big loads and just falling all over the place and just trying to get down the mountain. And put Erik in what's called a Gamoff bag, which is a hyperbaric chamber that you pump air into and brings you down to a lower altitude. It's something you guys can, if there are kids listening, you can study in science class. But 3 days later, a helicopter swooped in and saved Erik's life. So people are like, you had this disaster. Well, how do you think you're going to climb Mount Everest? Well, we thought the mountain had erected a barricade in our path, and believe it or not, it was by crossing through it that we became a team. We were so far from a team. And so we had great confidence that we were going to do well on Everest the next year. So the way I look at teams is you're just looking for people who believe in you, who want to lift you up, who allow you to stand on their shoulders, and you got to then be able to let them stand on your shoulders. And also, I think people who are motivated by challenge, like our team leader on Everest PV, he told me, and I love this because it's so beautiful to me, that he would have dreams, and he would tell me every night, I have the same dream, Erik. You and I, he'd say, are climbing over the Hillary step, and we're hand in hand, and we're going to reach the summit together. And I wake up crying. He would wake up crying. And I'm like, God, I mean, this guy may not be the best climber in the world. He may not be Alex Honnold, he may not, but he believes in what we're doing so powerfully, and he's motivated by the challenge. Actually, the challenge gives him energy. And so that's really what I look for on a team, not necessarily, the best pros, people who are very capable, but yet people who you can really lean into and believe in each other.
That's great. I like the idea of galvanizing around the challenge, right? Leaning into it.
Yeah. And if you're a weak, wishy-washy team that doesn't have a very strong mission or vision or whatever you want to call it, then you're going to fold in that situation. But if you're really committed and you really believe in what you're doing and why you're there, the storm actually becomes a galvanizing experience, I think.
One topic I've heard you speak to that really hit me in the heart is, I look at your life and read your books and watch your movie, and I feel like I am so inspired by the adventure. I'm like, God, Erik had to be he's just programmed. He wakes up every day and he's like, where's the adventure? I'm so excited. You actually described, life kind of as a knife's edge in a way. Of, on one side, you've got kind of adventure and excitement, but on the other side, kind of fear, helplessness, and laziness. Like, I just can't imagine, from what I know of you, that like you're never not just like, let's go to the adventure. I think it was really powerful to hear that you also struggle with all the stuff that we struggle with, which is like, one side I'm really excited, ready to tackle a day. The other day I feel really insecure and I'm helpless and all the things.
Yeah. No, that's very true. I mean, I'm not some super blind guy that just doesn't experience fear. I think I have met people, by the way, like that, like I had a buddy who was blind. He's a really good kayaker, and we kayaked the Grand Canyon together. And we're going through this gigantic rapid. And I go, dude, what's your level of fear right now? 1 to 10. I was like an 8. And he's like, probably a 2. And I'm like, man, you are so lucky, right?
Yeah.
Um, but most of us aren't built like that, right? And so yeah, I experience fear. Yeah, you're on this knife edge, excitement, adventure on one side, and fear and doubt. And on the other side, and we're just straddling that knife edge constantly, and I've straddled it my whole life. I mean, there are so many times when I've gotten down from a mountain and I'm sitting in an igloo or something, and I'm just thinking, I'm not cut out for this life. I'm not tough enough. I'm not resilient enough. Blind people shouldn't be doing this. I'm destroying my knees. I'm destroying my hips and my back. And 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 the other side of me is like, man, I want to do this forever. I guess maybe it's helpful that I was born with what they call FOMO disease, fear of missing out. I want to know what's possible. I want to know what's around every corner. So that's kind of been a saving grace, I guess.
Oh, that's great. I just, like I said, I think your humility is a thing that, on top of your adventure, is your spirit
Yeah.
for life is really inspiring to me. And I
Yeah.
think it's just good to know that someone that is as brave as you are, and as thrill seeking as you are, also struggles with the insecurity of
Yeah.
like
And I
helpless.
wish I was smarter too, because like if you're really smart, you don't have to go through all the suffering to learn. But most of us mortals,
Yeah.
we got to suffer a little bit before discoveries and learning come into our brains and our souls. I remember going up Mount Rainier for the first time. We wanted to climb it in the winter to see if we could, get prepared for Mount McKinley, or what's called Denali now, which is the tallest peak in North America. And we got up to an area, and it was starting to snow. And I had set up tents before, so I knew my tent. I'd done my preparation, but yet the snow was driving sideways, and it was this really sharp needles of ice that were driving sideways. And so I'd always taken my gloves off to set my tents up. So I'd just take my gloves off and try to orient it. And these driving needles of ice would hit my hands. And within like 2 minutes, they'd go totally numb. They were like fish hanging from my wrists. And I'd put my gloves back on and beat my wrists, beat my hands trying to get them. Eventually, my friends came over and was like, don't worry about it, man. Well, and they set the tent up for me. And I was so humiliated because I was like, I should be able to do this. I don't know how, but I should be able to do this. People shouldn't be doing this for me. I don't want to be dragged to the top of the mountain and spiked on top like a football. I want to be part of the team. And so I went back to Arizona at the time, and it was like 100 degrees out, and I was in a tank top, and I'd have my big mountaineering gloves, and I'd be on a field near the school that I worked at, and I'd break that tent down and set it up, and I learned to do it in my thick gloves. And, hey, to this day now, I can set up tents in any conditions. I don't have to, it can be a driving whiteout, and I can set up a tent just fine.
How do you find the balance though to I'm thinking about your family right now, is that that you're determined to make sure that you can do everything that everybody else can do, but also sometimes it's great to have people around you, even for me, to have folks who can help me and serve me. How do you find that balance to where you
Oh yeah.
off
No,
the
I
gas?
mean, at first I hated relying on others.
Yep.
I hated that because I thought it was like pity, like they'd be looking down on me as a blind person. And I didn't want to be dependent on people. And so, yeah, of course, as a blind person, you start to, or with any disability or any challenge, you start to like say, okay, I want to be as independent as I possibly can. And then you realize that only takes you so far. That actually starts to backfire because it becomes sort of this ego that's now another barrier holding you back. If I can't do it alone and I can't do it independently, I just shouldn't do it. No, I wasn't ever going to climb Everest alone. I wasn't going to ever kayak the Grand Canyon alone. It took an amazing team of sighted people helping me, supporting me in kayaking. Harlan Taney and my team on radios saying hard left, hard right, charge, brace right, so they're giving me instruction and help and along the rapids when they're getting knocked around themselves, So for me, that's been this hidden gift of blindness, is that you put your life in other people's hands, and you give them your trust. And it doesn't mean that they're going to be perfect. It doesn't mean they're not going to say left when they mean right. But because no one's perfect. But when you trust people, it's this insanely and powerful experience where you go to places where you never could have gone to before. And then they trust me. And that's beautiful when you put your life in each other's hands. It's a very powerful experience.
How long did it take you? I've loved whitewater rafting, kayaking since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
And, I remember the first time I ended in a class 3 rapid, and we may get too technical for folks who haven't done it. And I thought that was the scariest thing ever. And then I loved it so much that I asked my parents to take me to the Ocoee River. And at that time it was set up where they put you right down in a class 5 rapid.
Yeah, right.
And I was terrified.
Yeah.
And I could see what was coming. I could try to bend my body, and it was still scary. How are you able to overcome the fear of, like, yeah, you're getting advice that kind of tells you where to go, but like you hit that rock or you hit that swell, like it's jarring. How are you able to conquer that and to keep moving?
Well, I mean, I will say there's a reason there aren't that many blind kayakers in the world. Yeah, it is terrifying. And I'm glad I climbed for many years before I started kayaking, because in kayaking, you're riding this energy, as you know, and you're not always in control, and you're reacting to things happening to you so quickly, right? You're totally overwhelmed by all the stimulus that you have to respond to, and the river currents are pulling you in directions that you didn't anticipate. So suddenly you're in a place in the river you don't want to be. So you just have to be able to let go of your ego and react, just become, for your nervous system not to be fighting it, but to be accepting what's happening to you. And then just being at this sort of primal state of flow where you're just reacting. Your brain isn't consciously working anymore. That's why it took me years and years and years to be able to feel comfortable, with 30-foot waves knocking you over and you're upside down for 30 seconds and just waiting for the river to release you. And then slamming into a rock and just responding and rolling up and going, okay, I'm okay. Right. But yeah, it was a really hard process to be able to kind of let go and understand that you're not always in charge.
Yeah, I think that was where my head was going, is that, wow, I'm still incredibly impressed with the fact that you did ice climbing and rock climbing and, hiked all 7 summits. Like, I feel like, to me, I can relate more to the kayaking, and you can, like, it happens so fast that even if people are yelling, watch left, watch right, you're gone. And so it's just crazy to have, you talk about trust. When we talk about teams, it seems like trust always comes back to, like, the most important element for folks. Is that where you felt like, is that something that you would ascribe to as you think about your teams?
100%. I think about my teams, and I have love for my teams, like the deepest love, like the love for my family, for Harlan and Rob and Skylar and Timmy and Steven, who were on my kayaking adventures, and all my friends who helped me climb the 7 summits. As I said, I wasn't going to climb Everest alone. And so I could have either made a decision, okay, as a blind guy, if I'm not going to be totally independent, I'll just do the things I can do alone. but then you get stopped in your tracks at a certain level. So if you really want to go to the highest mountains, you got to let people in and be a part of a team. And I looked at these people that took, months out of their lives to help me get to the summit of Everest. And when we reached the summit way back in 2001, 19 out of 21 of our team reached the top, which is kind of unheard of. And I think it's because they all wanted to be there to be part of this experience. So people said we're going to have a disaster, an epic on Everest, and I was going to drag everyone into a rescue and people were going to die. Instead, we had one of the most successful teams that ever climbed the mountain, 19 out of 21 reaching the top. That was a world record. It was the most people from one team to reach the summit of Everest in a single day. And I mean, I don't want to brag, but I feel like, me being there and my team sort of rallying around this beautiful thing was why so many of us got to the summit.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, to me, like as I hear it, I'm like, that's what I want in any team I have, right? It sounds like we've got to have a really big goal. We've got to be able to tackle adversity together. What are other parts of things that you guys did in between the seams before the climb, in day-to-day life that helped you guys gel together so that you can love each other, right? When you talk about I love them like a family, like how do we create teams like that?
Well, you got to lay it out there for each other, my friend Jeff was like, I think one of the first people I invited on the team. And he's not like a traditional leader, like he's not like a CEO or, he's kind of this dirtbag hippie kind of guy, lived down in by the river in his van, I remember to go to Everest, he quit his job. He was a physician assistant at a hospital, and they said, well, if you leave this job, then you're not going to have it when you come home. And he's like, sayonara, later. He left and he joined the team. He didn't care. But anyway, so, like Jeff, when we climbed Everest, we left at 9:00 at night for the summit. And Jeff and Brad, who are on our team, they got to the base of the South Summit first. Now, that's the steepest part of the climb. It's real steep, and it's a false summit. And then you actually have to go over the backside of the South Summit, cross this knife edge ridge, like a couple 100 yards. It's like maybe a picnic table wide, maybe 2 feet wide. And there's huge drops on both sides. Then you climb the Hillary Step, and you are about a half an hour from the top. But at the base of the South Summit, Jeff and Brad got there, and they looked at these lines, these fixed lines, and they're all over the mountain. They're mostly on the way down. You clip into these lines, and especially in the storms that happen in the afternoon when you can't see, nobody can see. So these lines are like sort of guides to get you down the mountain. But anyway, so Jeff and Brad looked up, and they saw fixed lines, some old lines to the left that was up this jumbly rocky terrain, and then lines to the right up the snow. And that jumbly rocky terrain was okay for sighted people, but not that great for me, And Jeff knew that because we've been climbing together for years. And he looked to the lines to the right, and they were all covered in snow, about 1.5 feet of snow from the monsoons. And that's like a big decision, right? Like, do you do the thing that's easy for you or the thing that's easy for your teammate? And I mean, I call this Jeff's no barriers moment. It was so beautiful. He chose the lines on the right. He ripped them out. It was just insanely exhausting work at 28,000 feet. And I remember getting up there behind him, and he gave me a hug, and he said, I've given everything I can. Like, this has got to be my summit because I've given it all. And I gave him a hug, and I was just like, oh my God, he just sacrificed his summit for me. I mean, I'm crying right now because 20 years later, I still think about that. Anyway, so climbed over the knife edge and up the Hillary Step. Thank God Jeff watched me go, and he got a second wind, and he was behind me the whole time. So he summited about 10 minutes behind me. And that was really awesome because I didn't want him to miss out. Awesome. But anyway, that's a long-winded answer for your question. You got to lay it out there. It's not about the latest leadership principle. It's about love. You lay it out there for each other as best you can.
Well, I appreciate that. I read a quote before we have the last few questions. I read a quote about you that I'm interested in how it lands with you now. You were on the cover of Time magazine, which I think I can remember as a kid having, I don't know, it was first grade, second grade, something where we would create our own Time magazine covers and write an article about who we're going to be. Like, you had that. And the quote, it said somewhere in there's no way to put what Erik has done in perspective because no one has ever done anything like it. It is a unique achievement, one that in the truest sense pushes the limits of what a man is capable of. So you go from the Time magazine, cover of Time magazine, to having this written about you. Was it tough to, so you get all the accolades from it, but you're an adventurer. You want what's next. Was it tough to kind of figure out, like, what do I do now that, like, it seems, by life standards, I might have reached the pinnacle?
Yeah, for sure. I remember sitting in my hot tub out in my backyard with my wife, and I was getting letters from all over the world. Like people were like, hey, come and try this. I don't think I'm exaggerating too much when somebody would literally said, hey, I have this catapult. We're going to catapult you over a canyon, and we have this giant wall that we built. It's Velcro, and you're going to be in a Velcro suit, and you're going to stick to the wall. It's going to be amazing. And I'm like, no, that doesn't sound amazing. I'm not like this evil Knievel blind guy who just wants to go out and do a bunch of stunts and find risky things that I can do to, prove to the world that I'm this or that. I mean, that's just so freaking shallow. I didn't want any part of that. Yeah. I wanted the things I did to mean something. And so PV, who was our team leader, he did something so amazing. I still remember it. I came down the mountain and I was down through the Khumbu Icefall, which is another just jumbled up mess of boulders of ice of every size imaginable. And we had to cross through that 10 times. So you come down the icefall the last time, you're so psyched to get through this labyrinth of ice, and I'm alive. I'm so happy. And PV pulls me aside and he says, he says, do me a favor. He says, don't let Mount Everest be the greatest thing you ever do. And I was like, well, what else is there, PV? You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to go home and eat chocolate croissants and drink hazelnut lattes. And 50 years from now, I'll look back at the thing I did this when I was 33. And PV was saying, like, no, man, this is not a trophy on your shelf. This is not a picture on your wall. This is not a line in your resume. This is an experience that should be a catalyst to propel you forward to new discoveries, new learnings in your life. You've gone through a lot here, and so let it mean something. And so it really helped me to think about what comes next. It has to be meaningful. So I did projects like I went to Tibet and trained 6 Tibetan blind teenagers, and we climbed peaks in Tibet. We climbed a 23,000 foot peak together. We guided a group of injured veterans to the top of the 20,000 foot peak. And then all that work sort of got rolled up into a movement called No Barriers, where now we have done hundreds and hundreds of outdoor programs around the world to help people break through those barriers and sort of find what their own no barriers life looks like, and then re-enter the world and make their own impact in the world. And so for me, that was, has been the real legacy, the real summit of all these adventures.
Well, I'm inspired by, if you do the research on you, it's the No Barriers organization, but you're very clear. It's not an organization, it's a movement, right? And so tell us, what's that movement about? Are you, I see the tagline, but tell me what the movement's about.
Well, I mean, of course, there's an organization and staff, hardworking staff behind it, right? Okay. But I mean, like Covey, you guys have created a movement, right? You have thousands and thousands of people, propelling this beautiful, powerful message forward. Well, that's no different. That's what we're trying to create. A lot of people, as I said, they have these challenges and they get shoved into those dark places. And, so we take the folks like that, and these are challenges that are physical. They're disabilities like blindness, deafness, people in wheelchairs, people with autism, people with traumatic brain injuries, but also people with emotional challenges, what we call invisible challenges, people with fear and anxiety, kids in the foster care system, first generation Americans, right? And my belief is that, we kind of get like dug down into our own little niche, and that's more ego. I think at a macro level, challenge is challenge. And there's not that much difference at that macro level between a blind guy and a kid in the foster care system. We all have these macro challenges. And so the idea of no barriers is that if we can figure out how to lean in to each other and learn from each other and unite, we can solve those problems. We can be super proactive about how to solve them, and we can lift each other up. And we're not waiting for opportunities to get plopped in our laps. We're proactively being a part of this community that says, we're going to break through these barriers. We're going to figure it out. And so we bring in dozens of pioneers, people who have broken through barriers. They push the envelope in science and art and music and humanitarian fields, scientists, engineers, inventors, and then we create this big melting pot of community where we're all learning and trying to figure things out together. And so that's been really, really powerful to me.
Well, I would just encourage anybody who's listening to you and is inspired by your genuine spirit. Yeah, what you've accomplished, but what's clear is with any interview that you've done, but also talking to me today, is just how sincere you are about life and love.
Yeah.
They can go to your website, and again, I'll make sure there's a link in our podcast. But one of the things that I want to figure out how everybody starts getting access to is your video series on there for No Barriers. It's something that is password protected, so I want to figure out. Folks really need to spend time listening to your message because I feel like you have so much to say.
Yeah. That happened really like before COVID. We decided, hey, we're like this really high-end organization that like movement, we help people, but it takes so much. It takes, some of our programs are like 6 to 8 months long, right? And so we thought, how do we impact more people? So we started building some virtual leadership experiences with this No Barriers life at the root of it. And so we've been working with educators and kids and people with challenges and some corporate teams and things like that. And that's been really powerful to be able to kind of exponentially grow versus just doing it all in person.
Yeah, well, I just want to recommend our listeners to go search around your website and find ways to start learning more from you. Can I ask you a couple quick questions for
Yeah. In fact, but I'll interrupt and tell you, like, for instance, part of this No Barriers community, like we run programs all the time, and we've been running some really unique things lately. Tonight I leave, I go up to Glenwood, which is west of here. It's on the other side of the Rockies. And we're going to work with Kara. Kara is, when she was 3 years old, was run over by a skier. Really traumatic. She barely survived. And so she has traumatic brain injury. She has some challenges for sure with speech and with mobility. And her No Barriers pledge was to hike the mountain where she was injured at 3 years old. So tomorrow morning we leave at 6 a.m. We have about a team of 30 we've assembled. It's a lot of her community, and we're going to climb to the site of the injury, and then we're going to reach maybe the summit if weather permits. And we're going to make a short film about Kara and all the people that supported her along her journey. So this really, this stuff that I do, it just really fills my cup.
Well, I think it fills a lot of ours. And again, like I think that I appreciate the most is just your sincerity and your heart being in the work, which is why I want anybody who continues to listen to dive into the messages you're trying to get out there. One of the things that I know, so on the second season of our Change Starts Here podcast, we want to focus on learning a little bit more about these great leaders that we have here. And so for you, one thing that we know is that every great leader seems to have daily habits and disciplines that help them provide strength and a foundation for them. Do you have any of those? And if so, what are a couple of the most important rituals or habits that you have?
Well, I'll start with this. It's not quite a habit, but it's more of a understanding, I think. And that is, when I go into the beginning of these processes, like I'm going to kayak the Grand Canyon, I'm going to climb Mount Everest, or any process that I'm embarking on, I'm going to grow this organization. What I've learned is that you do have to go through this process where you have mostly questions and no answers. And it's insanely, it makes you feel off balance. You feel really tenuous. You feel really fragile, really exposed every time you begin these new processes. And for me, I think No Barriers is really, the life is like, how do you build the map through these processes, create a template to get you from base camp to the summit, whatever it is you're trying to pursue, and what do the elements look like along the way? And how do you express what those elements are? How do you harness them? How do you confront them? And so that you're kind of on the right track, right? Like, okay, I really have a strong vision here. I have a great team around me. I've had some crappy things happen to me, and I've been able to turn them into good things and to learning experiences. So I think for me, one habit is really embracing what that process looks like every time, no matter what I'm trying to do. And once you have that context, like, okay, I'm moving through this journey, and I'm experiencing the things that I should be experiencing right here at this moment.
Mm. What another thing that we notice is that great leaders also listen and read other great leaders. What
Yeah.
authors or thought leaders that are out there right now that do you listen to a lot right now?
Well, I really should listen to more thought leaders and so forth, but I really love like great books of literature. Like I'm a real fan of John Irving,
Mm.
and so I've written 3 books, and that experience has all the experience have been painful but really fulfilling at the same time. John Irving has a scene in The World According to Garp where he talks about it's actually his mom talking, I think, and he talks about a house, and the house has furniture, um, and eclectic furniture, and every room looks different, but yet the windows are open, and the fog starts billowing through the window and fills the entire house. And so I often think about that as something when I'm writing or whether I'm trying to process my experience. Okay, your life has so many different pieces that are so eclectic, but what's the fog that runs through every room of your mind and your soul? What does that fog look like? And because that's the thing that unites the different pieces of your life. And so as a writer, as a thinker, I'm constantly trying to think about what that fog is that I can figure out to somehow make my life feel meaningful.
Well, last question is a little less deep than those other two. I'm always curious, what are people listening to in terms of music? So I don't know if music's a big deal to you. So if it's not, that's great. But if it is, I'm always curious if you're building a playlist right now, who are those artists or what type of music are you listening to?
Well, I have to say, I love '90s alternative. So and like some of the hair bands of the '80s, like Motley Crue and Def Leppard and some of those groups and so forth,
Oh,
and
yeah.
some of the bands of the '90s. But I do have friends that have been very insulting and shamed me into start like really liking new music. So I have started to embrace new bands, like some of those really cool independent songwriters like Jason Isbell or like Josh Ritter,
Yep.
or just those like really cool like Body Bear or these really cool like new artists, and they write their own music, and it's really beautiful. So yeah, but a lot of times I'm listening to music as I'm working out. I'm kind of a very physical workout fiend, you know.
Yeah.
This morning I biked to the top of Lookout Mountain early in the morning before I started work. So a lot of times it's music that I'm playing while I'm flipping tires or climbing or working out.
Yeah. So then what's on your workout playlist? Like what's a group or two that are on your workout playlist?
Oh, Smashing Pumpkins, Guns N'
Yes.
Roses, Stone Temple Pilot, you know,
Yes.
something to get you charged up for your workout.
That's awesome. It's really hard though. I mean, I love music and I try to get into as much new music as possible, but it's really hard when you have such an affinity, especially towards a certain type of music or a certain period of music to get off of it. And I'm glad you went there to name the groups because it'll I'm going to go down a rabbit hole after this and introduce my kids to some of these amazing groups that I probably haven't listened to in a long enough time. Uh,
Yeah, and I even love like cheesy like soundtracks, like the Karate Kid soundtrack and Rocky, Eye of the Tiger. I still love Eye of the Tiger. In fact, I'm the goofball playing Eye of the Tiger at 5 a.m. Like when we're ready to start out on a climb. I'm like, yeah, let's get motivated. And I'm dancing to Eye of the Tiger. So I think that makes me kind of a dorky dad, but whatever.
no, I love it. I switched from that. I tried to my freshman year, those of us that had the short straw and had 8 a.m. class, which sounds ridiculous now, I blared in our dorm Kung Fu Fighting.
Oh yeah.
As like the wake up song, because it's like and then all of a sudden like everybody was Kung Fu fighting, and so I would just wake everybody up. So I'm with you, like the 5 a.m. you need something that just like flips the switch on for you.
Mm-hmm. And then in COVID, everyone being quarantined, I said, hey, I'm not going to sit around and like just survive this. I got to come out ahead somehow. So I started playing the guitar, and my gosh, that has been the most beautiful, fun experience of my life. Just creating music under my fingertips and singing along and singing songs and sitting around campfires. It's brought me so much joy, being able to play some music.
What was the first song that you really liked, right? Not like Mary Had a Little Lamb on the guitar, but like a song that you like listened to and you're like, I want to be able to play that. Have you got to one of?
Oh yeah, for sure. Tons of James Taylor kind of music, and like just this yesterday, I learned. What are they called? The Procrastinators. It's I will walk 500 miles and I will walk 500 more. So I learned to play that on my guitar, and it may be a cheesy song, but it is so fun to play and sing to. So a lot of times these days I should be working and I'm sitting in my couch playing the guitar.
Yeah, I think the group was the Proclaimers, but they
Proclaimers, thank you. Yeah,
I like the Procrastinators, though.
Sorry, I'm the procrastinator. They're the Proclaimers. Very good.
Oh, that's great. I see. A new friend of mine recently was pushing me to start asking people about their music, because if you listen to music, it's so personal and it does so much for your life. And so, thanks for going down this rabbit hole with me. Last question we ask everybody, especially for you, is you're talking to audiences all the time now, and you're as you're just talked about, you're making a short film here, so you're constantly thinking about where are people at and how can I help them break through, right? Hence the No Barriers movement. What's the best piece of advice, or just a piece of advice that's on your heart right now that you want to share with folks to encourage them as they leave here today?
Well, one thing I really try carefully not to do, I try not to, make life too prescriptive. Because yes, it's great to have prescription, but it's also great to go through your own journey and learn and discover and get propelled into these new environments where you're like, wow, I just learned something so important. I don't want to shortchange anybody in that process. So I'm real careful not to impose too much of my template onto others, because then you kill the magic that people, I think, aspire to in their lives. But I will say one of the guiding principles that has really inspired me and probably taken up a lot of my thought process is this idea that people call alchemy. The perfect story for me is this friend of mine, Hugh Herr, who helped us start No Barriers. He's a double leg amputee. And he was a brilliant climber. He lost his legs in a climbing accident. He got lost in a storm and his legs froze. They had to be amputated. And, look, it's not like some fairy tale. He woke up in the hospital and he looked down at where his legs were supposed to be. Instead, the sheets just dropped into space, and he wailed. He told me he cried and cried and cried. And, but he also told me this, which is what I always think about. He said, the greatest breakthrough of his life was when he looked down at where his legs were supposed to be. And instead of seeing loss, what he saw, he told me, was a blank canvas. And he was the painter, and he could build in that space anything his mind could conceive. And so the point being that loss had begun to transform into other things, like, the seeds of creation and innovation. And he wanted to climb. So he built these prosthetic legs in his garage, and he was able to climb. Became a world-class climber, building all these different shaped feet and legs, and took that experience, and he went on and got his bioengineering PhD, and now runs the biomechatronics laboratory at MIT, building the most sophisticated prosthetic legs in the world. They're like $65 million of R&D. And so that is the process of alchemy, I think, in a nutshell. It's like what we're all trying to do, right? Like take sadness and turn it into joy, and struggle into innovation and uncertainty and into purpose, right? I think adversity, like, I couldn't have stopped myself from going blind. There was nothing I could do. So challenge, adversity does shape you. But maybe you have a choice in terms of how it shapes you. Maybe you can be shaped into something kind of beautiful.
Erik, thank you for choosing bravery and adventure over comfort and camping. I appreciate you having the courage to climb and also kayak now. I feel like you're definitely being used for a movement, that's for sure. And I encourage you to keep climbing and keep encouraging us to get better. And thank you for bringing your whole heart here and giving us an hour of your time today.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, cool. Now I take off to climb a mountain in the morning. So thank you.
This was awesome. Well, good luck tomorrow. I appreciate you so much.
All right. Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
You too. Bye. Please support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, podcast on Apple or Spotify, and help us celebrate the beautiful, messy work of shaping human potential.